school. I'm known as Dr. Price Woman with 4 eyes. Thank you so much. I am just so delighted to be with you. I'm so delighted to hear all the wonders that are about this particular school. And I'm in a very interesting position at the moment because when Tony asked me about speaking tonight, I was delighted. And so I crafted what I wanted to say to you in a bit of isolation. And so the excitement of tonight for you will be to see, without me knowing anything about your amazing guidebook or anything about this, if any of what I say lines up. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, well, we'll all have a good meal together. Hang on one second. Okay. I actually am a person who's inveterately interested in pretty much everything. And that sort of voraciousness, I think, was sparked by my own growing up. I grew up actually on Cape Cod when it was a very rural place. The place shut down pretty much at Labor Day. And all of the wonderful summer folk packed up their cottages and their belongings and they left. And we basically had the run of the place ourselves. That meant there was a lot of time for exploring, a lot of time for, and of an era when it was light outside, your mother said go out and play and don't come back till it's dark. So there was a lot in my life that was about curiosity and questioning and why and noticing. And I think I've retained that a lot because one of the things I get so excited about is we have so much that comes at us. Sometimes it's like a wave. Information, studies, all kinds of things coming at you on your computer, on your Twitter feed, on your email, on Facebook. But the exciting part is that now we're in the midst of this sea of excitement and ideas. And I get very excited about that, and I wanted to spend a little time tonight and share that with you. So before I begin that, I want to thank you all again. I also want to tell you how delighted I am to be joining such a wonderful community. So I preface that before I begin. As you see on my title slide, it says that I want to talk a little about conversation, creativity and empathy. And each of those are actually related to some recent articles. It's interesting how so much of what we know and we are immersed in education with children is really looking at these wonderful, wonderful moments where children's learning is unfolding and we still really don't know. We're still learning. The human brain is, well, we can map and we can study the piece that makes us each human and special. We're still figuring that out. So what I wanted to do tonight was to share some perspectives about 2 articles that came across my desk. And I was really thinking as I read them that they really advocated for the kind of flexible, child-centered educational settings that are the hallmark of excellent early childhood and middle childhood education, which I suspect, I have a hunch, that we're sitting right in the nexus of here at Riverbend School. But I wanted to share these 2 articles because they came from 2 rather disparate locations. And when I saw them, I thought, we've got 2 very different starting places, and they end up in a very interesting place. So let me tell you about them. This month, I am an inveterate magazine subscriber too, so I get lots of magazines too. And this month's Atlantic Monthly magazine has a most amazing article by a child development researcher by the name of Erica Christakis. And full disclosure, Erica Christakis is one of my former graduate students. She's now at Yale, and it was just a total delight to open this month's issue and find Erica's article. Erica's article actually, rather ominously, is entitled, How the New Preschool is Crushing Kids. And Erica's work has really been looking at preschool programs. She's very often asked to evaluate preschool programs, and really looking at how those programs are really meeting or not meeting the needs of young children. And it's interesting how the new trends in very early childhood education really seem to be jumping on the bandwagon of more and more frequent teacher-directed education with the idea that more and sooner are better. And what was fascinating about Erica's article, and by the way, she does underscore that some of this in the past 20 years is probably really linked to the hyper-rise in standardized testing. But what she did in her review of the literature and the review of the research to discover that, in fact, even though there's always been a tension between a protected vision of childhood, that children need to be able to have time to be able to grow, and then the prepared vision of childhood, where we really do need to prepare children for their next stages of their lives. While there's always been this tension, this particular philosophy of more and teacher-directed and faster does not bear out in the long run. What Erica found out in her research was that heavy-duty programs that are really pushing early literacy, reading and writing, while they may have small gains in the preschool years, those were not necessarily sustained. And even more troubling, by the time children get to second grade, they're exhausted. They're not excited about learning, they're not excited about school. And she raises that as a real question about, as we're preparing our children going forward, we want them to be lifelong learners. And for all of us sitting in this room, I hope, but certainly for our children coming up, we're all going to clear the 90-year bar. That's a long time to not be excited about learning, right? So she raises that. The other thing she said is what she has discovered in her research, that the most effective pathway to not only vocabulary development and early reading skills is the unscripted, unplanned, spontaneous conversation that happens in classrooms between teachers and children, between children and peers. And those particular moments are the times where children gain and share information, where they gain perspective on others' ideas, and they develop problem-solving strategies. And more critically, when they learn from each other and they can help each other learn, it develops the capacity for empathy. And that is important in being able to develop and sustain lifelong, healthy relationships. To Christakis, conversation is like gold. Well, I read this article, and you can imagine I was turning cartwheels in my office because it was very exciting. And it, you get to the place where you are after you've been doing this work for a long time, and you say, yes, that's it. And I probably don't need to preach this to the choir, but this was a really wonderful article and making a really strong statement. So hats off to Erica. But just after I read this article, I suddenly was getting all these feeds in my email box, and then also on my Facebook, that were really looking at this aspect of empathy. Now, I don't know how many people subscribe to Harvard Business Review, but there have been a number of articles on empathy. But coincidentally, in my inbox, I was getting lots of information about a new program, package program called Start Empathy. And it kept quoting this particular set of articles from the Harvard Business Review. And of course, not that I'm a subscriber to the Business Review, although it's an interesting magazine, I thought, So I went and I found these articles. And the two articles they referred to, one was in 2012, and that one was entitled Empathy, the Most Valuable Thing That They Teach at Harvard Business School. And then there was one, it's really the title of the article, and then the one in 2015 that followed, which was very interestingly, empathy is still lacking in the leaders who need it the most. Another great article. But it was really interesting for me to go and really dig in with these, having just had Erica's words sort of ringing in my ears. And the interesting thing is that these two articles are really looking closely at what many people used to term an empathy as a soft skill. It wasn't one of those particular absolutely critical tools in necessarily a business leader's toolkit. We tend to think of strategizing, we tend to think of data analysis. But the interesting work by Ernest Wilson in 2015 was his study and his research of executives worldwide, people who are running very large corporations, people who are doing innovative work in this global digital economy. And he asked them, what are the 5 most important attributes that one can bring to be successful at this point in this digital global economy. And the interesting responses were not, you need to be able to do a real great data set. You need to have long-term, and even though those are important, and being able to understand how communication works, the 5 attributes that he named will be very familiar to all of you in a Montessori setting, and these are they. He said that those 5 attributes need to have, one is adaptability. You have to be able to be flexible in today's world, and you need to be able to have that sense of whatever comes, you can be able to adapt to it. The second was cultural competence. And that idea that there is a vast array of culture out there, and there is a vast array of ways of looking at the world. They really stress that, particularly now where we're so interconnected, any given moment, any given second, we can be getting word from the other side of the planet. They also said that it's really important to have a 360 perspective, that even though you may be looking this way, there's a whole other set of perspectives around you. They talked about intellectual curiosity, and they talked about empathy, being empathic, having a deep emotional intelligence about people that's closely linked to cultural competence. And that shocked Wilson. It really did. He thought, this is very interesting. We've got a new generation of leaders that are really looking at all kinds of different skills that perhaps another generation would have thought were less important than acumen, than finance. No offense, James. But this was a real big step. So the thing that was really interesting for me was it made me start thinking, if Ernest Wilson is looking at people who are now in the pinnacle of their careers or rising in their careers, and they're saying that empathy are really the things that we need to have, then my question was, well, then how does it develop? Can it be taught through this boxed program called Start Empathy? And then I began to think, wait a second, let's think a little bit about Christakis. So I put these 2 articles side by side as I was getting ready to speak with you tonight. And I imagined Erica Christakis and Ernest Wilson sitting down to lunch with me. And I imagined that they would, first of all, they would be incredibly empathic and gracious to each other. But they would also get a chance to talk about their research. And I wondered, what would they make of it? I wondered, would Wilson recognize that empathy doesn't become full-blown just by going through Harvard Business School? Would he recognize that there were roots of where those empathic people came from? And then would Erica Christakis want to know, where were those leaders educated? What were those early experiences that they had? And what a fascinating conversation would ensue. And so the more I thought about it, the more I thought that this idea that even though these 2 articles were taken from pretty much 2 very different ends of thinking about growth and thinking about how people grow and are most effective in their lives, that I really have a hunch that this empathy connection is all about conversation. And that it is through that medium, that ability to converse with someone. Daniel Lamott, the writer, often talks about there's talking, there's listening, and there's conversing. And one of the things that we work on, certainly, and I know you probably do too at Riverbend, is children can listen politely, but then they just say what they want to say. A conversation is really an exchange. And that piece, that being able to converse, really ask questions, consider what other people's experiences are, and really what the world looks like through someone else's eyes. And this is what Wilson's research actually captured when he talked to the executives and he said, can you just name what it is that successful people can do? They can look at the world through someone else's eyes. Children need to be able to learn how to do that. And the way they learn how to do that is to be able to have lots of practice doing that. With people in classrooms that, not in a scripted moment where you open up the empathy box and say, okay, here's the empathy moment today. But when you're sitting down, when you're playing the electric guitar, when you're having a conversation in the D Lab, when you're having a conversation when you're laying out the number tiles. That's where those roots come from. It's an exchange of ideas. It's looking at a different perspective. It's knowing that someone is really interested in what you have to say, and then you can be really interested in what they have to say. This idea that conversation starts that, and then the connection becomes, we understand each other, and even if we don't, I want to listen to you and tell me more, and that's what sparks creativity. I have an idea, I want to tell you about it. Wow, have you ever thought about this? No, I hadn't thought about that. We had an explore the other day in our kindergarten where we set a challenge for our kindergartners, and we gave them golf balls, and we gave them big tubs of water, and we said, here's your challenge, make the golf ball float. We gave them all kinds of different materials to try and make the golf ball float, including salt, big containers of salt, because one of the questions was really about the density of salt. And that was drawn on the prior experience of children who had been to a beach and had learned how to float. And the thing that was so great about that is there were many different ways to solve this problem. They had lots and lots of choices. They had lots and lots of avenues. But the best part was at the end, someone said, wow, that was really cool. Could we use sugar next time? Well, what a great springboard. And there was a whole conversation, you will appreciate this in kindergarten, because as scientists, they wanted to be able to, be sure they knew all their media. And so someone said, yeah, but we don't want to taste the salt. We want to taste the sugar. We want to be sure it tastes right for this. There was something about the saltiness, and that's what was making it work. And if something was sweet, it would sink to the bottom. Anyway, it was still a great creative moment. So in thinking about all of that, the thought that I wanted to share with you, and this is in a way of closing, because this was not intended to keep you too long, but also just to sort of be food for thought. I think about that schools, with the way the world changes this quickly, that schools are called upon very often to be places where children are not only called and allowed to acquire those traditional academic skills, but they also need to be places where children can develop the social and emotional intelligences to become those compassionate, creative, resourceful, and resilient people that we want to send out in the world. I think one of the big things about working in schools is we're always working toward an end we can't see. Yes, I do travel in Harvard Square, and yes, very large people come up to me and say, hello there, Dr. Price, do you remember me? And I look up and say, no, I don't, but you're very large, and you're clearly grown up, and you made it through kindergarten, so yay. I will not necessarily see where that person goes beyond Harvard Square, no. But that's the excitement of school. You are working, this is truly one of those examples of altruistic investment in a goal you may not see. But knowing that what you're sending out there has the possibility to change the world is probably what makes education the most exciting field to be in. It really does. And I think that piece that we have as humans to be able to be thinking and being able to hold simultaneously all my work that I'm doing now, which is exciting, may have an effect I never know about. That's what keeps you coming back every day. Karen is nodding her head, I can see that, yes. The other things just to close with is I'm learning about you, and the more I learn, the more I love. I'm learning about Montessori. And I also, in this, I do tend to be a person that relies on hunches. And while I'm sharing these two articles with you, my hunch is that at Riverbend, each of those 5 attributes is being taught in every classroom. For every child at Riverbend, there's someone who is engaging on a daily basis in rich, spontaneous conversation. And I think the other part is that sense of conversation as gold is traded freely in this place. And I hope that when I come on board officially in July, we'll have a gold rush of conversation. Thank you so much for listening, and I